No, missed it.
It's 3 o'clock. It is 3, that's all right.
It says 45 minutes.
You said it. When I crossed that bridge with it, I never did it. It's the
Last time we did this, is when we were doing years ago. We're always saying that. That's why we can't do anything.
I should go over bridge.
I loved it. I live in a boat.
I hope not.
Yeah, it's good. Oh, look at it. There it is. A tower.
Blackpool Tower.
Yeah. Hey, too big to say even what to do. Well, wait. Next stop. Got it.
It's gone up every day.
2,500. Up to 25,000.
January, sit down. What's it saying? Instead of 30th, so I'm going down. It says it's story day.
Wash your head. Calm down.
Scoring says.
Look, someone's waving at
So
us.
she's had the one on now, sits it down.
Aren't they? Look, his hand. That's my hand. Yeah. A changing colour hand. What's a changing colour hand?
I don't know. Joshua, calm down, okay? Calm down, which will chuck you off.
Can I shut the window?
Well, you can leave it open because I can see properly then.
That people were happy to swim in that water. There was a lovely disease that you could get called Stratford tummy. I'm sure I don't have to elaborate on that for you, but you only ever got it once in your life. If you got it and survived, you would never get it again because you had a lifelong immunity. If you got it and didn't survive, well, you would still never get it again. So only once. But in 1950, it all started to fall apart, and because of the threat of polio and Stratford tummy, they decided to build us a new one and knocked it all down. And sadly, we only have memories and photographs of that nowadays. Personally, I'm very happy because I don't want to swim in this river. It's very, very high today, actually. Come out here every day on this trip, and the river's about twice as fast as it normally is, and about 2 foot higher. We've had a lot of rain over the last 3 or 4 days, and it rushes down. It rushes down the river from other places as well. So it's quite high. This is our sister boat out now for a day trip. If you want to give her a wave as you go by, this is the Princess Marina. Not many people on there.
Wave, Josh, wave.
It's a lovely day to be a boat captain, isn't it?
It's a speedboat.
This bit of river that we're on is called Millionaire's Alley. As you've come up the road and you've seen the houses getting more and more elaborate and more beautiful and more weatherproof, you can probably understand why we call it Millionaire's Alley. There's a couple of interesting houses along here. The one that we just saw when we were at the swimming pool is the one that's on stilts. That's completely waterproof. That was sold for 1.3 million 2 years ago. As we come further upriver, we get to the caravan parks, which when we had our last major flood 3 years ago, in 2007, a lot of the caravans were swept away. A lot of the things that were at the caravan park were swept away. The bridge that we would normally go under today, but we can't because the river's so high, was so full of water as the rain came down that you couldn't get an envelope under there, and yet we had fridges and wardrobes and beds and bits of caravan all floating down the river and crashing. For months and months afterwards, all of the trees around here were full of things that you wouldn't expect to normally find in trees. Nowadays they've made all these new caravans and they're float proof, so next time we have a major flood, and I think everyone's probably looking out the window just now hoping that this theory is true, they've all got big float tanks underneath, so the next time we have a major flood they're chained to the floor with the float tanks, so hopefully they're not going to do it again. If we get another 48 hours of rain we may yet test it. They are mobile, but then again, they're not really. Because no, they're classified as mobile homes, but I'm not sure they're desperately mobile really.
How do you go far in?
Look how high the water is, Joshua. It's nearly on the grass. Can you see it?
Oh, yeah.
It's very high, the water, isn't it?
Normally we'd go down and we'd see Stratford and we'd see the Holy Trinity Church and the theatre and the bridges. I'm happy to tell you stuff about those if you can either have a look at them when you go back or see them on the coach window. Normally I would tell you all about them. I'll tell you about them anyway, I think, because it's quite interesting to go home with a couple of things about Stratford that you didn't know before. The Clopton Bridge, which was the one immediately to the right of where you got on the boat. It's a bridge that was built in 1490. Interestingly, it was built 3 months before America was discovered, so that puts it into some context. It's got 14 arches and it was built by Sir Hugh Clopton. Sir Hugh Clopton was an interesting man. He was a very rich man and a lifelong bachelor, and I'm thinking the two facts are probably linked. And he went on when he left Stratford to become Lord Mayor of London. A bit like Boris Johnson, but better looking. He donated lots and lots of things to Stratford and lots of buildings and areas of land that we build things on. We've got our new theatre. Does anyone know anything about the theatre? We've had it being built now for 2.5 years. It's due to open at the end of October. It's a very large, imposing building on a beautiful area of grassland, which they've recently developed, the Bancroft Gardens. The theatre has been being built for at least 2.5 years, nearly 3. It's due to open for its first production at the end of January. It's on budget and on time at the moment, and it's cost us £112.8 million. What we did, we left the outside walls up and we scooped everything else out and completely started again. There's a couple of nice stories about Shakespearean theatre. Within the theatre that we have, the RSC, there's a Swan Theatre, which is a round building in the middle. It's quite beautiful and quite different from the rest. The big theatre locals call the Jam Factory, because that's kind of what it looks like. And the Swan Theatre sits right in the middle of it. It's a circular theatre. In Stratford, all of our 3 theatres have what we call a thrust stage, where the stage comes out into the middle. It's actually quite difficult to deal with a lot of scenery. The actors are basically working in the round, and the audience, when they come in, they go up vertically, so you can be in the first row or the 4th, and you're going to be looking down onto the stage. It's quite a unique concept in theatre building, and it's been the same in Stratford forever and ever since Shakespeare was here. Shakespeare never actually had any of his productions in a theatre in Stratford while he was alive. In fact, he never had any of his works printed until 7 years after he died. His friends got together and decided to print his first folio of works. He was a very rich man when he died. He had 4 properties in Stratford and 1 in London. And we're not entirely sure why, really. He went to London for 7 years. We're not sure what happened there. We think that he was an actor. He was one of the roving players, one of the king's men. But he accrued an awful lot of money, so that when he died, he was able to leave his daughter Susanna, his favourite daughter, a lot of money, and he left his wife his second best bed. I'm sure you've all read that. It sounds a bit brutal, that, but it's not, because in those days the best bed was rarely slept in. It was for visitors, and the second best bed was the marital bed. So he was actually being quite romantic when he did that. It's not an insult. We all think it was an insult, but it's not. Shakespeare and his wife Anne had 3 children, Susanna was born 6 months after the wedding. I'll let you do the maths on that one yourself. And then they had twins, Judith and Hamnet. Judith lived to be a ripe old age of 77. She married a wine merchant. He was a bit of a womanizer, a bit of a drunkard, and Shakespeare didn't approve of him. So when William Shakespeare died, he didn't leave an awful lot to Judith because he didn't approve of who she'd married. She went on to live to 77, and Hamnet, unfortunately, died at 11 and a half of the plague. In those days, it was virulent in England and it wiped out lots of towns. When Shakespeare was born in Stratford upon Avon, there were 2,000 people living here. 260 of them died in the year that he was born of the plague, or the Black Death. You were not allowed to be put into the church when you died. If you died of the plague, you were considered to be unclean. Shakespeare had his son, and we have no record of where Hamnet might have been buried because we think he was just put into the plague pit. But the church, Holy Trinity Church, is the one that Shakespeare was christened in when he was 3 days old on the 26th of April. And he died there, and he was buried there on his 52nd birthday. He died in 1616, and he's buried 17 feet below floor level inside the church. Then and now, you had to be very wealthy, very influential, or a high member of the church to be buried inside the church. And Shakespeare was. He made sure that nobody would touch his bones by writing a curse to be put on top of his grave so that no one would touch his bones. It sounds a bit odd, that, doesn't it, to say no one would touch his bones. Why would anyone touch bones? But in those days, every 50 or 60 years, we would have a big spring clean of the churchyard. We'd get all of the bones out, we'd get all of the recently and not so recently deceased people out, and we'd have a big bone fire, which is the origins of the word bonfire today. Shakespeare didn't think that was very seemly, so he made sure that him and all of his close relatives were buried inside the church. 17 feet below floor level at the Holy Trinity Church is about river level, so we hope he's still there. He was encased in the medieval equivalent of concrete, so as far as we know, no one's ever touched his bones, ever been cursed, but I don't know, one day we might find out differently. Does anyone know the Shakespeare story at all? No. Anne came from a family of 5 daughters. In those days, Shakespeare's wife Anne came from a family of 5 daughters. In those days, the eldest was expected to be married first, and then the next youngest, and so on. Anne was a bit of a disgrace for the family because she was a huge 26, and she hadn't yet been married. So her father tried to marry her off quite quickly. She met Will, who was 18. That was a massive scandal. It's probably quite a scandal today to have an 18-year-old and a 26-year-old. Anne was pregnant when they got married, and William had to walk to Worcester, which is 25 miles away from Stratford, to ask the permission of the Bishop of Worcester. Because in those days you only had weddings in the spring. Because of the time of year and because of Anne's state, they had to ask for a quick one. And so he had to walk to Worcester to get the bishop's permission. So they got married and they had Susanna, lived very happily, and then she had the twins, and he buzzed off. We don't know where he went to. He just left. There's no records anywhere of where he went. We think he went to London, but we don't know for sure. I was in London 2 days ago. I went to visit the Globe Theatre, Shakespeare Globe Theatre, and I learned something quite interesting, which is that people who were of a theatrical nature then were not considered to be very high in society. Nowadays, people have a great snobbery value for theatres. In those days, they were equivalent to travelling gypsies. And on Bankside in London, which is the opposite side of the river to all of the houses and the Houses of Parliament, all of the important buildings, they had the bear pits where they had bear fighting, and they had the actors and the theatre and the ladies in red, the ladies of the night. I'm going to protect the children's ears. They were all on the same side of the street, so you can see in society terms what the theatre was about. It was just roving people who liked to put on plays, and they weren't considered to be very good in society. Women were not allowed to act at all, so men had to act all of the parts. It's just interesting to think now that we go to the theatre, we go to a Shakespeare theatre, and we're very well-to-do, and we all think that we're very highbrow to go and watch Shakespeare, but in those times you would have been considered quite lowly to go to the theatre. Queen Elizabeth I, she never ever visited the theatre. She visited the bear pits, In fact, she owned part of the Bear Pit organisation, and she never ever went to the theatre, not once. She also had really awful hands. That's something that I learnt as well this week. She had horrible hands. She had gnarly hands, and she had warts on her hands, and she wore gloves the whole time. Now, I don't know if any of you know that Shakespeare's father was a glove maker. The reason the family became so wealthy in this area was because he was a glove maker and he dealt with goat skin for gloves. But the reason that gloves were so fashionable was because Elizabeth I had gnarly hands. So like Victoria Beckham nowadays, she set the trend and everybody wore gloves. So the family became very well-to-do, and Shakespeare's father was an ale tester and a mayor and a policeman and a debt collector, pretty much everything he wanted to be in the town. So Shakespeare went to one of the very best schools because his father was the mayor. In those days they went to school from 7 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock in the evening, and they didn't sit down at all. They would stand at their lessons. They would jolly well do what they were told, and it was very strict. And they left at 13. They left school at 13. So we have no record of Shakespeare having attended the King's Grammar School in Stratford, but we think that he did because it was the best school, and his father was mayor at the time, so that would have made sense. This is a bit of the river that we don't normally see at Bancroft Cruises because we're normally turned around having gone down to the church. It's actually very pretty, isn't it? These are the lottery houses. Once when you win the lottery, you're going to go knock on the door. Do you want to be locked in up there? No, this is the Avon. If you've gone into the normally when we come out from the
Never mind.
We're supposed to
to the right of that, yes, the Avon, the River Avon starts and ends at Stratford. If you're in a leisure cruise, you can't go any further than Stratford. You can't go on the canal. So you can go all the way from Tewkesbury to Stratford on the river, and then you can get, if you're in a canal boat, onto the canal system. You can't go any further than Tewkesbury. Because if you're further than if you're making an 8 foot wide, you can't go
that's too big now.
so most of the cruises can't. So it goes to 45 miles. It's not really too much. And then it turns into the River Severn.
He's had to cut the grass up, you know.
That's his job.
It's his house, so it's on the left hand side.
Just a big garden, just like a river for them.
Oh yeah.
The clouds from the
Josh.